Hello everyone, it's Scott and welcome to the Phyrexia All Will Be One preview season, and we're coming to you on the official Caffeinated Gamers YouTube channel, and we want to thank them for sponsoring this video. And please remember to like and subscribe to this content so that way you can get other Phyrexia All Will Be One spoiler videos as we see preview season officially begin later this week. So today we're going to look at the planeswalkers that have been spoiled over the weekend and earlier today, so we can get an idea where they fit into standard, if they fit into standard. So let's get started by looking at first Nissa Ascended Animus. For 7 mana, 3 colorless, 2 green, and 2 Phyrexian mana, you get the legendary planeswalker Nissa, who is completed. And if you don't use mana to pay the Phyrexian mana cost, you pay 2 life. Then for each time you do this planeswalker enters with 2 fewer loyalty counters. So if you pay all 7 mana to cast Nissa, she's a 7 loyalty planeswalker. If you use 6 mana and pay 2 life, then Nissa's a 5 loyalty planeswalker. If you pay 4 life to pay for those 2 Phyrexian mana, then Nissa would enter as a 3 loyalty planeswalker. Now, the really interesting thing about this version of Nissa is her +1 ability creates a XX green Phyrexian horror creature token, where X is Nissa Ascended Animus loyalty. So the upside of this is you're going to start with at least a 4/4 creature with Nissa, even if you do pay the Phyrexian cost in life. So Nissa is immediately going to be able to protect herself, which is a good positive ability. And we've seen Nissa as a 5 mana planeswalker from War of the Spark and play across a lot of formats. So there's a good chance that we can see Nissa play here. So for -1, she can destroy an artifact or an enchantment, which is another great ability to have on a planeswalker. And then for -7, until the end of turn, creatures you control get +1 for each forest you control, and they gain trample. So Nissa I don't see seen play in a lot of decks, but a green stompy deck might be the right home for Nissa, where you can quickly get Nissa to 8 loyalty or even 7 loyalty. You cast it, you -7 if you have it at 7 loyalty to start with, and then all your creatures get +1/+1 for each forest you have and trample, and most likely you're going to win on that turn. So I think Nissa is playable in a stopping deck. Now, is it a 4 of in those decks? No, probably not. It's probably a 1 of or a 2 of in those decks as a kind of top end way of finishing off an opponent. Alright, our second planeswalker is Kaya, Intangible Slayer. For 7 mana, just like Nissa, 3 colorless, 2 white, and 2 black, you get a legendary planeswalker, Kaya, who has 6 loyalty, and more importantly, has hexproof. So what this means is that to kill Kaya, you're going to have to deal damage to Kaya with creatures most likely, or effects like Burn Down the House, where it does 5 damage to everything on the board, including planeswalkers, because that would go around the hexproof. So Kaya gives us some really good abilities. So for +2, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. So that's a turn in a game. You know, you're low on life, you cast Nissa, they lose 3 life, you gain 3 life, and you can over and over activate that to help keep yourself stable in the game, but also drain your opponent out as you go. And then for 0 mana, you get to draw 2 cards. Then each opponent may scry 1. So I think, no cost to draw 2 cards, incredibly powerful ability. Your opponent scrying 1 isn't that big of a deal. And then for -3, you can exile target creature or enchantment. If it wasn't an aura, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 white spirit creature with flying in addition to its other types. So I think that's a really powerful minus ability on Kaya, because if you go ahead and copy a legendary creature that has abilities like Sheoldred, let's use that as the example. Okay, you exile Sheoldred, you make a 1/1 white spirit creature token that's a copy of it. That means that you would get the +2 anytime you draw a card, and your opponent would get the -2 life when they draw a card. So Kaya, interesting card. Not sure how playable it's going to be because of the 7 mana, but in the right deck, it might be a 1 or 2 of in a right kind of control deck. All right, next we have Varashka Betrayal Sting. For 6 total mana, 4 colorless, a Phyrexian, and a black, you get legendary Planeswalker Varashka with 6 loyalty. And like we saw with Nissa, if you pay the Phyrexian mana with life, then you get 2 fewer loyalty counters for Varashka when she comes into play. But even for 5 mana, a 4 loyalty Planeswalker is a pretty good one for Varashka. And I think what makes Varashka very playable is her 0 ability, which is you draw a card and you lose 1 life, but you get to proliferate. So proliferating is going to be a very big thing, I think, in this set. And that will not only increase the loyalty counters on Varashka, but it's going to do it on all of your Planeswalker. So if we end up with some kind of Planeswalker Super Friends deck, Varashka would be a great one to have in that, because it will go ahead and push the loyalty count of all of your Planeswalkers by 1. For -2, you get target creature becomes a treasure artifact with sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color, and loses all other card types and abilities. So basically for -2, you get to take out one of your opponent's creatures, and it just becomes the downside of that is only that it becomes a mana source for your opponent. So a very good ability there as well. And then for -9, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. I don't see Varashka being ultimated very often, but I think those other 2 abilities are very, very playable. And if you're going to pay 5 mana for Varashka, I think that's going to make her playable in some decks in Standard, as that ability to remove something, and then again draw cards and proliferate, which would help other creatures in your deck as well, if you've got counters of any kind on them. Next, we have the Eternal Wanderer. For 6 mana, 4 colorless and 2 white, you get legendary Planeswalker, the Wanderer. First thing about the Wanderer, it has 5 loyalty, and no more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat, which is a very powerful help, because it, in essence, allows the Wanderer to somewhat protect herself by limiting how many creatures can attack it. So her +1 ability is exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. But this is a great way to exile one of your opponent's cards, and it doesn't come back into play until their next end step. So that means they've lost it not only on your turn, but also their turn, and then they get it back. But then again, you can do the exact same thing with it. You can exile it again and basically take it out of the game while you're plussing your Eternal Wanderer. For 0, you can create a 2/2 white Samurai creature token with double strike. Okay, we've seen Samurai tokens with the Wandering Emperor. Now we're going to see them also with the Eternal Wanderer. But these have double strike rather than vigilance, and given the nature of what we're seeing so far from Phyrexia Obli 1, double strike is a great ability to have. And then for -4, for each player, choose a creature that player controls, and then each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. So the thing about the Eternal Wanderer that I really like is basically the Eternal Wanderer can be a board wipe. And not many Planeswalker cards can do this. This is basically farewell on a body, okay, on a Planeswalker's body. Now, you don't get to get rid of the graveyards and artifacts and enchantments, but in a very, very creature-heavy format that we're in, this is a great ability to go ahead and get rid of stuff. And I think we'll see this card played, certainly in Esper decks, particularly in Esper Control Shell, because you get that control ability, plus then you can create creatures and do other things with the Eternal Wanderer in addition to that. So I think it's a good card. 6 mana, though, makes it very difficult to play in decks, but again, as long as we maintain this mid-range format, I think it's going to see a couple copies of it in decks. Our next is Luca, Bound to Ruin. For 5 total mana, 2 colorless, a red, a Phyrexia mana, and a green, you get legendary Planeswalker Luca, again, who's completed. Okay, if you pay the full cost, he has 5 loyalty. If you pay your Phyrexian mana with life, then he's going to enter with 3. And Luca, to me, is the kind of planeswalker you're going to want to play in a creature deck, because first, for +1, you can add red and green mana to your mana pool, and then spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. His -1 is create a 3/3 Phyrexian Beast creature token with Toxic 1, and then for -4, Luca deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control as you activate this ability. So, Luca potentially can have a very, very large impact on the overall state of the game, because he can make your creatures that are coming into play cheaper, but also he can create creatures to block for him and also attack with. And the -4 ability, which you can activate immediately if you pay 5 mana, will give you the ability to do significant damage to your opponent and their creatures, or planeswalkers and creatures on the board, if you've got a creature that's got 5 power with it, or even 4. It's going to have an impact on the board state. So I think Luca's playable, but again, it's going to be in the right deck. I think the Gruul shell that we've already got goes really back to this past summer, is probably where Luca might fit into. But otherwise, not sure if he has a place, possibly in a Jund deck, but we'll have to see, because the abilities are good, but they're not like, oh wow, these are great abilities. Next, we have Nahiri the Unforgiving. For a colorless mana, a red, a Phyrexian mana, and a white, you get a legendary planeswalker, Nahiri, who has 5 loyalty. So Nahiri, again, can, if you pay 2 life to pay the Phyrexian mana, it comes in with 2 fewer loyalty counter, so it would be a 3 loyalty planeswalker that comes into play. And the thing that I really like about Nahiri is her +1 ability, because until the end of your next turn, up to 1 target creature attacks a player each combat if able. So this is a way, you've got a troublesome creature on your opponent's side that you have to get rid of. You can force them to attack on their turn, and then you can take that creature out with the blockers that you have. For her other +1 is discard a card and then draw a card. So kind of red filtering, kind of normal what we see with red. And then for 0, you can exile target creature or equipment card with mana value less than Nahiri's loyalty from your graveyard, and create a token that's a copy of it. That token gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So in the scenario I just said, where you've got Nahiri who is forcing something to attack, you block it, you kill some of your stuff. On the next turn, you can bring one of those back and have it attack your opponent. So I think that's a really powerful ability. Now, where Nahiri fits, I'm not exactly sure at this point, because we really don't have a Boros shell for it to go in. There was a Boros deck that was popular over the summer of 2022. Maybe this would go in there as a 3 or a 4 mana planeswalker that really forces your opponent to play a game that they may or may not really want to play. All right, next we have Kaido Dancing Shadow. For 2 colorless, a blue and a black, you get legendary planeswalker Kaido, and he enters with 3 loyalty. When 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may return 1 of them to its owner's hand. If you do, you may activate loyalty abilities of Kaido twice this turn rather than once. So, very nice static ability. Hey, you can, if you attack with a creature, it does damage. You can return it to your hand, and you can activate the abilities of Kaido a second time. So, for +1, up to 1 target creature cannot attack or block until your next turn, which is a really powerful ability, because typically what we get into sometimes is situations where you would like to attack, but there's one creature on the other side that you really don't want to attack into. Well, Kaido can make that creature not able to block until your next turn. So because of that can then get some damage through, which would allow his static ability to activate for you, and you can then again go ahead and use one of the loyalty abilities. So for 0, you get to draw a card, and for -2, create a 2/2 colorless drone artifact creature token with Death Touch, and when this creature leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life. and you gain 2 life. I can see this. We've got the Grixis shell that's very popular right now anyways. This would fit right into that. It could fit into the Esper shell as well. Or we could see a Dimir deck built around Kaido and its abilities. So I think we're going to see Kaido. I'm not sure of how many copies of it we're going to see in a deck, but it's certainly something that deck builders are going to want to experiment with early in the format as they look for ways to get in damage and activate a Planeswalker's loyalty abilities twice. Because generally speaking, anytime we can activate the loyalty abilities of a Planeswalker more than once, that's a pretty powerful card. All right. Now we have our last new Planeswalker card of the day, and that's Tyvar Jubilant Brawler. And this is a 3-mana Planeswalker for a colorless, a black, and a green. You get legendary Planeswalker Tyvar with 3 loyalty. Now, you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. So his static ability is actually a really powerful one. Because a lot of times you get things that enter the battlefield, but you can't activate their ability until they've been in play for a full turn. Now with Tyvar, those abilities can be immediately activated. Okay, the one that jumps to my mind is this would be in a Jund shell, and you play a Bloodtithe Harvester. Okay, and then Bloodtithe Harvester can immediately then go ahead and use its ability to give something minus something. So you can take out a creature right away when Tyvar's in play. So for +1, you can untap up to 1 target creature, so you can attack with something. Then Tyvar could untap it so it can be a blocker the next turn. And then for -2, you can mill 3 cards. Then you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So where I really see Tyvar going into, we've already got a graveyard deck that is in these colors, these Golgari colors, and I think we're going to see Tyvar immediately jump into that deck because they want to mill cards, and they've got a lot of creatures already that are mana value 2 or less. So this would be a great place to see that. So I think that deck is helped significantly by having Tyvar in there. All right, and that brings us to our last Planeswalker of the day, and that's Koth, Fire of Resistance. We've already seen Koth before. We included him in a previous video, but I wanted to bring him back since we've looked at all the Planeswalkers that we've seen so far. So Koth, for 4 mana, 2 colors, and 2 red, you get a legendary Planeswalker Koth with 4 loyalty. And you're going to search your library for a basic mountain card for +2 and reveal it and put it in your hand, then shuffle. So Koth is a mana generator for a red deck where you can go search, get mountains, put more of them out, then add your deck as you go. For -3, Koth, Fire of Resistance deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control, which is a very powerful ability. Basically, you plus Koth the first time, you got a lot of mountains out, you can kill almost any creature in standard at that point. And for -7, when you get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. So if you plus Koth twice, get him to 8 loyalty, then on the next turn you -7 him, he's left with 1 loyalty, and now every time you have that emblem that says that every time you play a mountain, it deals 4 damage to any target, which is basically burned to the face of any opponent. Alright, so those are our Planeswalkers. Very interesting group. Now, are any of them surefire hits in Standard? I don't see any of them as a surefire. We're going to see this in a lot of decks. But I think in the right deck, most of them have some playability in Standard. Probably the ones that are the least likely to see play are the 6 and 7 mana Planeswalkers that we saw at the beginning of the video. But even there is a place for some of them, given the fact that we're really in a very mid-range format. Alright, thanks again for staying with me to the end of the video. And thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring this video. And we'll be back later this week with more Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching the video.